the Edmund Fitzgerald.
A 729-foot ore carrier
transporting iron ore when it ran into high winds,
which apparently broke apart.
For decades, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was treated as a mystery of nature, a victim of a monster storm, swallowed whole by Lake Superior. No distress call, no flares, no survivors. But when a modern underwater drone finally descended into the black water, it revealed something no one was prepared for. The ship wasn't torn apart. It wasn't crushed. It was intact in all the wrong ways. And what the cameras found next changed everything we thought we knew about her final minutes. For nearly 50 years, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was explained away with a single word: storm. A monster of wind and waves, a force so violent it erased a ship without warning. No distress call, no flares, no survivors. And for decades, that silence was accepted as proof that the lake struck fast and without mercy. But when a modern underwater drone finally descended into the black water of Lake Superior, it revealed something deeply unsettling. Not chaos, not scattered wreckage, not the violent end everyone expected. Instead, the ship appeared almost composed. The bow stood upright in the sediment like a monument. The steel hull rested quietly, coated in decades of silt, as if it had simply gone to sleep. There were no signs of fire, no evidence of a collision, no explosion frozen in steel. That alone raised the first question no one wanted to ask. If the ship didn't tear itself apart on the surface, then why did it vanish so suddenly? As the drone drifted closer, its lights cutting through the dark, experts watching the live feed noticed something else, something subtle, something wrong. Details that didn't match the long-accepted story. This was not the wreck of a ship overwhelmed in seconds. This looked like a ship that had been holding together right until the end. And that raised a far more disturbing possibility. What if the Fitzgerald didn't lose a battle with Lake Superior? What if it never knew it was losing at all? Because if that were true, then the real danger wasn't the storm above the waves. It was what was happening quietly below the deck, unseen, unheard, and unstoppable. Before it became a wreck, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was a symbol. When she entered service in 1958, she wasn't just another cargo ship. At 729 feet long, she was the largest freighter on the Great Lakes, a steel giant built to move mountains of iron ore through waters known for wrecking smaller ships. Her white superstructure and deep red hull made her unmistakable on the horizon. People stopped to watch when she passed. Sailors called her the pride of the American side. She had power, speed, and a reputation that bordered on myth. More than 700 successful crossings, no serious accidents, no lives lost. For nearly 2 decades, she met Lake Superior's worst moods and kept going. That reputation mattered. On the Great Lakes, trust in a ship isn't optional, it's survival. Crews don't just work aboard a vessel like the Fitzgerald, they believe in her. Captain Ernest McSorley believed in her too. One of the most experienced captains on the lakes, McSorley had commanded ships through storms that would turn lesser crews back. He knew Superior's habits. He knew when to push forward and when not to. And on November 9, 1975, he chose to push forward. The Fitzgerald was fully loaded with iron ore, riding heavy but steady, heading east toward Detroit. Another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, traveled nearby, both ships aware of a storm building behind them. Nothing about the situation felt unusual. Storms were part of the job. November storms were expected, and the Fitzgerald had faced worse, or so everyone believed. But myths have a weakness. They hide slow damage. They hide design limits. They hide problems that don't announce themselves. And somewhere beneath the confidence, beneath the steel, something on the Fitzgerald was already being tested in ways no one could see. The legend was strong, but legends don't show cracks until the moment they fail. The storm arrived faster than anyone expected. By the morning of November 10th, Lake Superior had transformed into something unrecognizable. Winds screamed past 70 miles an hour. Waves rose higher than houses, slamming steel with relentless force. Snow and ice erased the horizon. Radar became the only way to know another ship was still out there. Through it all, the Fitzgerald kept moving. Captain McSorley stayed in radio contact with the Arthur M. Anderson, which followed several miles behind. The conversations were brief, controlled, professional. No panic, no alarm. Then came the first warning. Mid-afternoon, McSorley reported a problem. The ship had developed a list. A vent had been lost. One of the hatch covers wasn't sitting right. It sounded serious, but not fatal. His voice remained calm. The storm was brutal, but the ship was still responding. That calm would become part of the mystery. At 7:10 p.m., the Fitzgerald sent its final message. "We are holding our own." 5 minutes later, the Anderson's radar went blank. No mayday, no flare in the snow, no sudden cry for help. The Fitzgerald didn't roll. It didn't drift away damaged. It didn't limp toward shelter. It simply disappeared. When the Coast Guard launched the search, they found almost nothing. No lifeboats, no bodies, just scattered debris and a thin oil sheen on the water, proof that something catastrophic had happened far below the waves. The absence was disturbing. Ships don't usually vanish in silence. Crews fight, they call, they warn others. But the Fitzgerald gave no sign of struggle, and that raised a chilling question. What kind of disaster gives experienced sailors no time to react and no reason to believe they were already lost? In the days that followed, silence turned into speculation. With no survivors and no distress call, investigators were left with questions instead of evidence. The lake had erased the moment of failure, and in that vacuum, theories rushed in to fill the space. One idea rose quickly: a rogue wave, a single wall of water taller than the ship itself, crashing down with enough force to drive the Fitzgerald under in seconds. Lake Superior was capable of it. Sailors had seen waves arrive in groups, each one larger than the last. If the ship met one at the wrong angle, it could explain the sudden disappearance. But rogue waves leave chaos, twisted steel, clear signs of violent impact. Another theory pointed to structural failure. The Fitzgerald was massive, almost too massive. At over 700 feet long, her hull bent and flexed with every wave. Years of stress could weaken steel slowly, invisibly. One bad moment might have caused the ship to snap apart. Yet the radar didn't show a ship breaking up. It showed a ship simply gone. Some believed the Fitzgerald struck an uncharted shoal. Visibility was near zero. Charts in the 1970s were incomplete. A hard grounding could have damaged the hull or hatch edges, letting water in below the waterline. And then there was the most uncomfortable theory of all, that water entered through the deck, through hatch covers that were supposed to be sealed tight, and flooded the ship quietly from the inside. At the time, there was no way to prove it. The wreck lay too deep, the technology didn't exist, and the lake wasn't giving up its answers. So the Fitzgerald became a legend instead of a lesson, a mystery frozen in time, waiting for the one thing that had been missing all along: a closer look. For nearly half a century, the Edmund Fitzgerald rested beyond reach. 530 feet down, Lake Superior's water is near freezing, lightless, and crushing. Early expeditions could only glimpse the wreck in fragments, blurred sonar shapes, grainy video, outlines without detail.
enough to confirm where the ship lay, but not enough to explain why. That changed with technology the original investigators never had.
In 2023, a new expedition returned with tools designed not just to observe, but to analyze. An underwater drone built for forensic precision, 6 floodlights strong enough to cut through sediment, 4K cameras capable of capturing damage measured in millimeters, sonar that could build a 3-dimensional model of the wreck as it moved. This wasn't exploration, it was an autopsy. As the drone descended, the surface above was calm, an unsettling contrast to the storm that had swallowed the ship decades earlier. The tether unspooled slowly, screens aboard the research vessel filled with black water, drifting particles, and then shape. Steel emerged from the darkness. The bow of the Fitzgerald stood upright, embedded in the lake bed like a monument. Time had dulled the paint, but the structure was unmistakable. The ship wasn't scattered, it wasn't shredded, it was whole, in a way no one expected. The drone circled carefully, mapping the hull, scanning the deck, documenting every seam and edge. Engineers leaned in closer as familiar assumptions began to feel less certain. Because if the ship hadn't broken apart violently, and if it hadn't struck something head-on, then the answer had to be smaller, subtler, hidden in places no storm would touch first. And that's when the drone moved toward the forward deck, toward the hatches, toward the details no one had ever seen clearly before. The drone slowed as it reached the forward cargo deck. This was the most vulnerable part of the ship. 21 massive hatch covers stretched across the deck, each one meant to seal the iron ore below from the lake above. They weren't decorative, they were the barrier between survival and disaster. The cameras zoomed in. At first, everything looked ordinary. Rust, sediment, the quiet decay of time. But engineers weren't watching for damage, they were watching for absence. "Back up," one voice said quietly. The drone reversed a few feet. That's when it became clear. A hatch clamp was missing. Not broken, not bent. Gone. These clamps were thick steel fixtures designed to hold the hatch covers down under extreme pressure. Each hatch was supposed to have 22 of them. Lose a few, and waves could pry the cover loose just enough for water to force its way in. As the drone moved to the next hatch, then the next, a pattern emerged. More clamps were missing. Others were twisted backward. Some looked as if they had been torn away under repeated impact. This wasn't a single failure. It was widespread. Then the drone reached the vent pipe near the forward hatch. What should have been a capped steel tube was now an open ring. The pipe had been completely sheared off at its base. A direct opening into the cargo hold, a hole wide enough for freezing water to pour through with every wave. Inside the control room, no one spoke, because this wasn't speculation anymore. This was physical evidence of how water could have entered the ship, fast, unseen, and relentlessly. The Fitzgerald hadn't been struck down in one blow. It had been opened, and once the lake found its way inside, there was nothing left to stop it. What frightened experts wasn't just what the drone found, it was what it implied. The Edmund Fitzgerald wasn't destroyed by a freak event no one could predict. It wasn't overwhelmed by a single impossible wave. The evidence suggested something far more unsettling, a design vulnerability hiding in plain sight. Those hatch clamps weren't optional. They were the only thing standing between thousands of tons of cold lake water and an open cargo hold. If even a few failed, water could pool on deck. Each wave would add weight. Each impact would loosen the next clamp. Slowly, quietly, the ship would grow heavier at the top, exactly where stability mattered most. No alarms would sound. The crew wouldn't feel danger until it was already irreversible. The sheared vent pipe made it worse. That pipe ran straight into the forward cargo hold. Once it broke, water didn't need to force its way past steel covers. It had a direct path inside. With every wave, tons of water could rush in and never fully drain back out.
That kind of flooding doesn't look dramatic. It feels manageable until it isn't. Naval engineers reviewing the footage reached an uncomfortable conclusion. If this failure mode was real, it wasn't unique to one ship. Other freighters built to the same standards could suffer the same fate under the same conditions. Which meant the Fitzgerald wasn't just a victim of bad luck. It was a warning. A ship designed to survive storms, undone by details no one believed could fail. And that raised one final, haunting question. If the lake exposed this weakness only after 44 years, how many others are still waiting to be discovered? Because the drone hadn't finished its survey yet. And deeper along the wreck, something else was still coming into view. When the Edmund Fitzgerald went down, 29 men vanished with it. No final words, no chance to escape, just a ship that slipped beneath the surface and never came back. For decades, families were told it was an unavoidable tragedy, a storm too violent, a lake too powerful. Nothing more could have been done. But the drone footage complicates that story. If water entered through compromised hatches, if a vent pipe failed silently, then the disaster wasn't sudden, it was progressive. Minute by minute, the ship was changing beneath the crew's feet, growing heavier, lower, harder to control, while everything still felt normal. That may explain the final radio call. We are holding our own. Not denial, not bravado, a statement that was true until it wasn't. After the wreck was studied, shipping standards began to change. Hatch inspections became stricter, load limits were revised, drainage systems were rethought. The industry didn't call it a mistake, but it quietly acted like one. Still, not everyone agrees the case is closed. Some damage on the wreck remains unexplained. Certain fractures don't match slow flooding, and parts of the lake bed around the ship haven't been fully mapped. Investigators admit there are areas the drone couldn't reach, angles it couldn't see. Which means the story isn't finished, because Lake Superior keeps what it wants and reveals the rest on its own time. The question isn't whether we know more now, it's whether the next dive will confirm everything we think we understand or uncover something that changes the story all over again. The drone is already being prepared, and below the surface, the lake is still waiting.